Pet Behaviour Odysseys, Episode 5, The Path to Treatment.
Hello and welcome back to Pet Behaviour Odysseys. My name is Daniel Mills and I'm Professor of Veterinary Behavioural Medicine at the University of Lincoln, where together with my colleagues we run the Animal Behaviour Clinic at the University of Lincoln. It's a veterinary behavioural referral service for people with pets with problem behaviour. And thank you for joining Millie and myself on this unique podcast series. Pet Behaviour Odysseys is about exploring the experience of having a problem pet, focusing especially on the client's experience, something which we feel is not discussed enough by people. And it's such an important part of problem behaviour management. And it's one of the things that sets aside dealing with problem behaviours compared to just training an animal. So let me start by introducing my colleague at the clinic and co-presenter of this series, Millie Jones. Hi, Millie.
Hello.
Now let's get back to chatting with the family, who are the stars of the series, given their Pet Behaviour Odyssey. So welcome back, Becky and Craig.
Hello again.
Hello. This is episode 5 of an 8-part series, which is dedicated to the journey associated with the dilemmas rising from your lovely little Dachshund Drax. And if you haven't listened to the earlier episodes, we'd encourage you to do so. Anyway, to cut a long story short, Drax came to us with a combination of both separation-related problems and inter-dog reactivity, and some reactivity towards people. And in previous episodes, we've talked about how this can all be tracked down to issues relating to frustration. We've been to several others seeking help, and I think it's fair to say that, Becky and Craig, you hadn't made enormous progress over a number of years prior to coming to us.
No, that is correct.
You've been given some good advice in places, but the problem was that getting it all together and getting it so that it worked for Drax, I think. And each week we examine a different part of Drax's journey and the family's journey. And we hope the series will give people deeper insight into the professional services involved in managing problem behaviour, that it is much more than just dog training. And that's something we'll return to in a later episode. And if it's done properly, the whole process of assessment, there's a lot of science behind it as well. Or at least that's the way we do it at Lincoln. So without further delay, let's get started. So thank you once again, Becky and Craig, for joining us today and making this whole series possible. In the previous episode, we explored the nature of separation-related problems. We highlighted how this is a complex problem with 4 major forms. We also discussed one of the myths about hyperattachment, and we also talked a little bit about the role of attachment and secure versus insecure attachment and how it affects dogs. So this week we're going to talk about the process of implementing treatment. So we're going back to the human side, and in future episodes we're going to talk more about the specific treatments involved in separation, but we're going to focus on this human behavior change side of things this week. In particular, we're going to let you into sort of the back room, so to speak, about how we go about helping clients. Because when we ask people to do things with their dog, we are actually doing human behavior change. And that's as big a part as making sure they've got the right skills to actually train the individual. So I'm going to hand over to Millie.
Thank you. Arguably the biggest part, as if we can't help the human, we often can't help the pet.
Absolutely.
So we mentioned in a previous episode the importance of making sure clients have the capability, the opportunity, and the motivation to bring about the changes needed themselves. So this is important because without aligning those well, even if we have the absolute best plans, we're theoretically brilliant, we've really got it together, they're not going to work if we don't have those things as well. So speaking about capability first, this can be divided up into physical capability and psychological capability. So when we're thinking about the people involved in changing a pet's behaviour, we need to know, have they got the physical capabilities, i.e. the physical skills required to be implementing things that we might be asking them to do? And also the psychological capability, so the knowledge and understanding of what they need to do and when they need to do it, as well as making sure they're in the right frame of mind for what it is we're actually doing, which is a hugely important part when we've got people also living under stress as well as their pets. So Becky and Craig, and you can answer individually if you prefer, or take it in turns. In terms of, I guess, the physical skills and capabilities, and then the psychological skills and capabilities, with the sorts of things that we started to do with you, and I'll just very briefly go over them just so we've got them in mind. So keeping a diary was one of them, and we've mentioned this earlier in relation to some of the diaries we kept previously, and making sure that was going to work for you. So that's probably a key one if we're thinking about physical as skill and what we're asking you to do there. Implementing a safe haven and what we called the sensitive carer exercise. Avoiding triggers, so continuing to avoid situations that might actually cause unwanted behaviours to occur with Drax. And then using these discriminative signals and starting to implement them into training and separation training. So I know that's a big question and a lot of information, but just thinking about those, firstly, physical skills, how or what did you think was most important, or what parts of sort of physical skills did you think were important in being able to implement some of these things that we were discussing with you?
So obviously diaries is a very sore point.
Yes.
However, I saw the importance of the diary that we used because it was very much focused on I'm just trying to think of all the different elements, but it was more around an emotional response. So Drax's how heightened his emotions were out of 5, I think it was. Also my emotions were in there as well, any external triggers. So it was very much focused on emotion as opposed to how long we've been out of the house for. So not
Yeah,
enough time.
I think just for the benefit of the listeners, why was diaries a sore point? What was your experience of diary keeping?
Because my life alongside a full-time job and then being a mum was then keeping homework of daily, hourly diaries of my every single movement around Drax. So how many steps we've done, how much time it's taken, what time of day was it, did it incorporate any picking up keys, taking off shoes, putting on shoes. It was very, very time consuming alongside life and Drax and everything else. So yes, I was quite averse to diaries, but it was this diary that we did was very manageable.
And I think there was also the trigger in the fact that it linked back to doing all the things that hadn't worked as well.
Yes, but they are very important because that's how you see progress and behaviour change. If you haven't got something tangible to refer back to, obviously that you haven't got that motivation to keep going, and you can't identify certain triggers and things like that. So they are very important, and you did it in a very caring and supportive way.
In the last episode, we mentioned the importance of consistency. But we are, I think, in the clinic, we're seeing an increasing number of cases with these sorts of issues where it strikes me that the owner has been completely micromanaged, and any concept of free will seems to have been taken away from them because they're so overly managed. And actually, that undermines their confidence because they've become petrified of doing the wrong thing, because they're trying to account for almost every breath that they take on every day. And I don't think you're unique in that. We've seen quite a few clients like that.
Yeah, I'm chuckling. I'm not going to mention names, obviously, but one of the previous traders we worked with, Craig had a special relationship with said person. You really didn't get along with them because it was very much micromanaging and very dictatory, and that was just their approach or their style. But you really didn't like it at all, did you? And these were really meant to be like a top behaviourist through recommendation, but yeah, stand it because
it was the fact that the question would come and I would answer the question honestly, and because the question wasn't what that person wanted to hear.
What was the question?
I can't remember specifics, but it was really weird. It was like, I'm going to ask you an open question and you tell me, and then I will tell you the answer, but it's not the answer you want to hear. But it's not that they were wrong. It's my answer was wrong. And we had a lot of clashing where it was
you just didn't want to do it, did you? Yeah. No, you really didn't want to do it. And that obviously hindered it. So the relationship with the behaviourist is so important as well. and just that empathy and that understanding and that compassion that you get as well. But in terms of going back to practical skills, the sensitive carer, again, it wasn't related directly to the separation anxiety. So I'm thinking, well, why are we doing this? But actually, it's all about frustration, and it's teaching Drax new skills to know what to do if there's a stressful situation, if there's a dog approaching us, if someone's come to the house. Well, what do I do? Rather than me just shouting and telling him off and saying no, stop it, or trying to run the other direction and avoiding, actually we're teaching him some skills. And it was very much teaching me to be compassionate and empathetic with him, which he was responding much more to, because he wasn't getting in a heightened state because my emotions weren't in a heightened state. So you talk about change, like behavior change in the owner, and you were training me, whether or not you disclose that to me, and if I'm sure you did, but you were very much, I was being subject to a behavior change program. And that's what it came down to, because it's never been about me before. It's always been about Drax and his problems. Well, actually, no, the problem's always been me. Because actually, if we think about it, when Craig, you took Drax for walks, he wasn't like this with you. So this hour knew it was successful. I actually handed over the reins physically to Craig out on walks, saying, you show me what to do. Do you remember that? When I said, you need to lead me now to tell, right? Whereas before it's me getting told by people to tell me what to do, and then I told Craig and he'd just do what I say, because he's very supportive like that. But actually, no, I'm not the best person to do this, because my emotions are really hindering Drax's success. So let's pass it over to Craig, and he can be the calm one and the patient one, and then that sort of really helped, doesn't it?
I think that's such a nice recognition between you, in that situation of working together to find, like you say, the physical skills required to help Drax. You're going to have different strengths, and that's very normal. You're going to have different concerns in different situations, and sort of seeing that and working as a team in that way is a huge thing.
I think another key thing there is that it's about finding a way forward as a team. And, working with the team and the family who, including the dog, working out what works for them, as opposed to dictating this is how it should be done. The thing that we dictate is this is the goal. How we get there will vary from one client to another. And as I said, different people and different members of the family will need different things in order to make the progress. And we have to identify where there are strengths and build on those strengths, and relieve pressure where there's pressure for people. I think that's a really important part of that whole process. Absolutely.
And you tapped into this a bit already, Craig, because I think your relationship with previous behaviourists and sort of how you were feeling about things, that kind of, and we've talked a lot about assessment and understanding what was going on with Drax. So when we talk about the psychological capability, so we're starting to maybe feel that we've got a bit more knowledge and understanding of what's going on with Drax, and maybe that's the starting point. But like you said, being asked to do sensitive care or being asked to do some of these kind of out of context things was a bit like, what? Why are we doing that? Why aren't we doing separation training? This is a bit weird. But again, sort of, how did you feel in relation to that? How important that was to understand that, to move forward with it, and given those previous experiences and feeling, well, this is a bit different. Did you feel a little bit sort of different in how you approached it?
Yeah, I mean, I was open to change. We've mentioned on previous episodes, we were desperate for it to work, and I think I've mentioned previously, there's a bit of an optimism and a bit of a pessimism in our relationship. I would probably say I'm probably more pessimistic. I like to say realistic, but I'm probably pessimistic. Whereas Becky's very optimistic and very kind of positive and sees the good in everything. So I think, I was beaten down a little bit. But after Becky had come back from meeting yourselves, the vigor and how, how excited, and how positive it was, more than what I'd seen when we'd obviously linked in with other behaviorists. So there was just something that kind of made me think, this is going to work this time. And I was slightly different in the fact that, I did think it was weird that we were doing all these things that I'd never done before. But at the same time, it's really weird. I didn't question them as much because they were so kind of out there for what we'd done. My instant reaction was, well, this is probably why it's never worked with the other methods, because the other methods have been very linear, and we've been asked how it's going and we're saying how it's going, but we're sometimes being treated as what we're saying is not right, and we're doing it wrong, or the onus is on us, so to speak. So I think on the basis of doing the sensitive care and doing these things that were all alien, were actually quite a positive thing, because we'd never done them before, which was kind of an indication that maybe this was gonna be the time that's going to be different.
And we could start on walks and stuff, and we had people around, and it wasn't stressful, was it? And we'd never had that before. So even though we weren't where we wanted to be, we've actually been able to leave them alone. We were far from that. But actually, we started to rebuild some of that quality of life because we had people around to the house. I remember on my daughter's birthday and Christmases, we had a house full of people, and Drax were amazing, weren't they? We did sensitive care, we gave him his ball, and it was just a different dog. Whereas before, he still does it now occasionally, doesn't it? But if someone sort of sat up too quickly or stood up, he'd go for him, he'd lunge and he'd bark, and it was just an awful experience. That fact, we just didn't want people to come round to the house, did we? Because it was just so embarrassing.
I noticed that.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and in those instances, that were Christmases and birthdays, so it were family, it were people that he'd known, he was kind of semi-used to, he recognised. I mean, you had another one the other day where we had a plumber come round, we had an issue with his washing machine, how it had all been connected. So a complete stranger who even I'd never met before, it was just purely telephone conversations. And I said to Becky, it's going to be a nightmare because it's a complete stranger, a new smell, a new person.
What did I say to do?
You just said it was just a case of the ball out. As soon as we got the ball out,
Do the sensitive carer. And he did it.
I gave him the ball before there was a knock at the door, and it was almost like the knock at the door didn't matter. And then this big, and the plumber guy was, he was. I'm 6 foot, but he must have been 6'4". He towered above me, so that must have been quite intimidating for Drax to see this big person coming in. And he just basically went and sniffed around him, and then that was it. I was just throwing ball about, and we were just playing fetch in the house while there's a random person disconnecting all plumbing, and he genuinely didn't. It didn't faze him. It did not, which I genuinely couldn't believe, having the fact that we would have people come to his house and stand and talk to us at his door, and it would sound like a Rottweiler were coming through the door rather than a little Dachshund.
We're going to yell more about these techniques in, I think, the next episode. So we'll hold some stuff back on that. But thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think that just those stories that you can now tell, and as Daniel said, we'll talk about it more. But kind of, we're down the line now where these are skills that Drax has developed, but it's very normal to still have that anticipation of, it could all go wrong.
Yes, it does go wrong
because
it's not perfect, but
it's and that's where your optimism, your pessimism probably balance out at realism, which is great.
Makings of a great couple, actually. You complement each other.
Oh, thank you. So, but I think the sensitive care, and as we said, we'll talk about it more later, but it's a nice example of that capability question of, it was an exercise we actually did in quite a lot of depth with you, Becky, in that first appointment, and you did brilliantly at going away and practicing it and sending us videos of examples of you using it, and very quickly we saw a response to that. So it was a nice sort of evidence to it. So thinking about opportunities, this is where we can think again sort of in physical terms. So the chance or the opportunity we have physically to implement what we want to do, and that can be in relation to how much time you have available, or if things are potentially costly, or using other resources in that sense. And in relation to Drax, we probably are thinking about time, because you're balancing your time between work, family, doing things with Drax. how did you feel about sort of or with the plan you were given at that time? Physically, how much opportunity did you have to implement the things we'd given you to do?
It when looking back, it really didn't seem to impact my day-to-day life at all. But I can't think of a time where I was thinking, "Oh, I've got it like a chore to do it." I sort of slotted it in because I was able to work from home, which was quite a luxury. And I know not a lot of people can do that, but it helped me because I was able to incorporate a lot of this the separation training in that. But then everything else, it was day to day. It was on walks. It was just at home in the house. There was a lot of strategies that he taught us what we could just do while we're in the house, whether that be when we're upstairs and we're leaving Drex downstairs, and sort of learning to be separate from him in that respect. So it just it fit into our life. We didn't have to invest too much time in it, really, did we?
No, I think I struggled a little bit more. Sorry, I struggled a little bit more with my shift pattern with work. There'd be I had a rota where I would do 7 days continuous work and then have a couple of days off, and then it would be straight back in. But the days off wouldn't necessarily always fall around a weekend, So trying to actually work around a diary was probably more complicated for me.
But yeah, I think because you did have days off during the week where I was at work, that was actually quite helpful because then you could do the training with Drax by yourself. I think where we probably struggled more was doing it together.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, with your shifts, that we had lesser opportunities to do it together. So that's the bit that probably took us longest to get round to do. And to be honest, we still don't leave the house together now, do we?
No.
It's just just ongoing. Yeah, we don't do it. We leave a gap, and then one of us will go out after the other one. So, but yeah, it was definitely a lot more manageable and realistic. Okay.
I think that's one of the things you mentioned previously with the amount of time you were spending with the diaries, getting you to do less, but to do it better.
Yes,
provides a much greater opportunity. Yeah. It gives you the opportunity to do things well. Whereas if you're so busy, it's very difficult to have the opportunity to do things well.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it weren't enjoyable. We dreaded it. We dreaded having to on previous like training programs. We didn't look forward to doing it all. Whereas this, it was very much it wasn't a chore. It just sort of, if I was doing an exercise to leave the house, I'd leave the house and I'd go somewhere that I needed to go. I'd go to the shop. I'd go to the super. Like, oh my goodness, I'm doing errands. This is amazing. So it was very much fit around my life. Not just
and there you go. We're creating optimism for boring day errands as well. So dual benefits. So in relation to opportunities, we can also think about social opportunities, and this is more how our plans and how what we want to implement fits in with our kind of social and cultural sort of needs in that sense, or opportunities. And essentially that you don't feel awkward or fear criticism from others concerning what we're asking you to do. And I think that's another interesting one to maybe compare what we were asking you to do to what you've been asked to do previously, and how, because I know you've got a good family support system with Drax, and that was a component when we started things. So how did you feel in relation to your kind of social circle and how you were viewed by others, I suppose, in implementing the things we were asking you to do versus previously?
Can I just ask in relation to that, given I know how much time you spent doing diaries and things, did members of the family say to you, "You're mad, doing all this? Why are you sticking with this dog?"
I got it a few times. I think it's different with how do I say, generational. My dad's viewpoint on things is a lot different to siblings' viewpoints. I think early on it was kind of at what point do you just kind of call it, but I think that viewpoint's changed. I don't think it's the same as what it was.
No, I think you're right. I mean, there's much greater recognition that they're part of the family, and you don't give up on a member of the family because they've got difficulties.
Yeah.
I think my sort of judgments mainly come from friends who have got very well behaved dogs who have never encountered any problems with this, and they just couldn't understand either one, why we've still got the dog, or surely it's not that bad, why can't you just come out for an hour, why do you have to be at home with the dog? So there was judgment from certain friends, I feel, whether they didn't say it directly, but it was more the looks and the like, what are you doing?
Well, that's exactly why we're doing this series, though, because if they've got well-behaved dogs and they've not got problems, they might be dog owners, but they probably have no idea what it's like.
Absolutely.
So,
I think there's a paradigm shift as well in regards to our close friends knew from the get-go we had obviously complications about going out. So when it was introduced that we were doing something new, which kind of, I mean, my friends specifically, when I obviously explained what I was now doing, it wasn't kind of are you mad? It was a kind of, I can kind of understand why you're doing what you're doing. And it's really weird. We still have conversations now, when I'm out and, how's the dog doing? And it's really weird because they've indirectly been on the journey as well, because they've known how bad it was from the start to the fact that we can now, go out and socialize and come back. So they realize it as well, I think, whether it's an overtly, or if it's just something subconscious, but they're aware because they've been a part of our journey through the plight of what we've been saying, of what we've experienced.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think it was more the fear of judgment from the neighbours, wasn't it? Like, because they obviously see us doing the training and going in and out of the house. So, but they were they were just quite blasé about it. Like, all right, you're doing that again, are you?
Couple next door.
Yeah, I'm not dancing anymore. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, and we talked there a bit about the things we might, worry about or fear criticism or get criticism, but there's also some nice bits in there as well, I think, where you've said, in a way, your friends have gained an understanding of the situation, and perhaps that will help them in future, you never know, or in understanding different issues and just developing that bit more empathy around sort of animal ownership and that journey that a lot of people are on.
Yeah.
And obviously this entire series is an opportunity to share that journey with a lot of people. So coming then on to motivation, and Daniel and I have discussed this before. One part of this is reflective, so a conscious commitment to the plan, and we don't think you had any issue there. You were, no question about it, committed.
Yes. Yeah, highly committed.
But one of the hard aspects then is the other aspect of motivation, which is the automatic. It's the habits. The things that you do that just without thinking about, and not talking about Drax, but people who have problems with dogs that are attention seeking, and the dog whines and they just touch their hand down and stroke the dog, and they that's just become a habit. And trying to break those habits and thinking about it, were there any particular habits looking back now in relation to Drax that you thought, yeah, that probably was an unhelpful habit, and we got hold of it?
I mean, probably loads, because we won't be in this position we're in. I think I've always been quite I thought I was always been quite strict at not responding when he's doing attention seeking behaviours like the stroking and the whining. One of my friends sort of does that quite a lot with their dog, and when they're crying at the table for food, she'll give them food to stop them crying, but it just makes it worse. So I do try and train my friends as well throughout this journey. But I do remember when I came to the clinic for the first session, I was doing something, and Daniel, you sort of picked up on it, and I didn't realise I was doing it, and I can't remember. I think I was rewarding him at the wrong time with his treat.
Reinforcement. It's a very common problem that we see. It's great that people are using positive reinforcement, that sometimes they just drop it in at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And again, that can become a habit, and dogs do what works for them. So that's, if you get the timing wrong, you potentially create it. But at least if you identify those things, that's the first part of sorting them out. Is okay, doing that, I need to do it. But as I said, I think you are, as a family, you're very aware. As I said, your commitment was without any doubt that it was there, but you were also capable of reflecting on what you were doing. So you were like sponges taking in what we were saying as well, and that's quite unusual, actually. And I mean, you're unusual in a positive way. Because actually, for a lot of people, they are so stressed, it is really difficult for them to take in that sort of information, and we're asking them to think about things in a new way.
But I think that's, we just needed someone to tell us what to do.
Yeah, it's really weird because you're so unconscious in your decision making that you become so blind to it until someone physically
Points
says,
it out.
"Do you know
that's
you've
exactly
just
what
done?"
automatic motivation is all about.
Yeah. So you were teaching us, and then from having that knowledge, we could then change and teach Drax things. Well, until someone tells you that or tells you the right way of doing it, you can't possibly change. So yeah, we would.
But it works though, because I remember there were times where Becky would do something and I would say, "You've done it again." And I'd do it and she'd be like, "You've done it again." So even like we started seeing it in ourselves, we were seeing in one another.
And we sometimes do that deliberately as a game between couples, or if they've got like young children, we put the parents against the children. And they have to point out each time the other one makes an error, and whoever's made the most errors at the end of the week, they have to do a forfeit. So, for example, if it's the parents who have made the most errors, then the kids get to choose the takeaway on Friday night and the movie. If it's the kids that've done it, they've got to clean their rooms. I'll tell you what, 90% of the time it's the kids who become much better at this. They love catching their parents out. But sometimes we set couples against each other in the nicest possible way. They've got to have the right sort of relationship. Last thing we want to do is to be responsible for them getting a divorce.
Being the dog.
So another aspect that we consider about the changes we're asking of a client concerns something known as the theoretical domains framework. So I'll just hand over to Daniel to just briefly talk through what this is, and then we'll explore a few components of it.
So yeah, time for the professor to talk the theory stuff again, I guess. So this is something that complements, capability, opportunities, and motivation. And all the theoretical domains framework means, or TDF for short, is it's basically, what people have done in the field of human behavior is they've looked at all the different things that people do to try and help people change their behavior, and they've brought them together. And, in sort of one of the standard protocols, there's about 14 different ways in which we can help people bring about change. And, different ones are applicable for different people in different situations. You can use that list of 14 different methods in the domains framework as a checklist, if you like. But usually what we do in a clinical situation is that we sort of make a judgment as to what we think the client needs. We listen to what they say. And active listening is a really important skill for the clinician, to listen to their clients and make sure that the clients appreciate that they are being listened to. And we start off usually sort of with an idea of what we think is most useful for a given client without having to go through the formalities of it. But I'm now going to actually go through some of these things, as I said, because I know that we did some of these things with you, and there is a reason behind it. These things weren't just random. So in relation to Drax's treatment plan, so I say some like skill development we've already sort of covered, and I don't think we need to. Skill development is one of the theoretical domains, making sure clients know what they've got to do, how they're going to do it. So knowledge is another one, and we've talked a little bit about that. Understanding. You've mentioned understanding the importance of what needs to happen and as I say, there was no problems there. I think one of the things that was really important in the early days for you, and, again, looking at you now compared to when we first saw you, is about belief in your capabilities. You've become a very skilled dog trainer, manager, if you like. Whereas when we first met you, I think your experiences have been such that we felt that you didn't know where to turn. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, nail on the head.
I mean, and I think related to that is, so there's a belief about capabilities, but there's another domain which is, I think, quite closely related, and particularly in your case, and that's the sense of optimism. So we've mentioned that previously, but it's believing that you're capable, but also believing that success is possible. You've mentioned several times how, you've almost felt like this was the last roll of the dice. So, what is it? What were can you think of specific things that made you become more optimistic about the future? What was it that we said? Can you remember? I can't. Really,
I think it took me, even with yourselves, it took me a while to actually believe that we would be able to ever go out of the house with that. And I remember I had every time I had a check-in with Millie on the phone, and she asked where I sort of could see us going in the next few months. I couldn't think that far ahead at all.
I remember you saying, I don't think I'm ever going to get out the back gate, or sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. I generally,
it was a belief at that point. It was I just can't see it.
Yeah. And now looking back, I can't even ever think of like just being in that situation because of just of how far we've come. But I think the time was when I actually managed to go out to the shop and do some shopping, knowing that Millie was watching through the Furbo camera, just making sure that Drax was okay. So it was giving me that confidence that Millie was there sort of out the whole process. But I was actually doing things like normal things. I know this might sound really ridiculous to someone listening to this thinking, well, like going to the shop, how is that such a big deal? But for us, it was a massive thing. Or just getting in the car and driving away. The shop was literally just around the corner. It wasn't like an hour away. But just seeing him, that he was not completely settled, but he wasn't hurting himself and he wasn't barking the house down. And I had someone guiding me to say, it's all right, just stay out. You were literally saying, stay out, just don't go back, because every inch of me wanted to go back at every whine and cry and bark. But he's like, no, stay out, have that confidence. So the more we did that, I could see actually, oh, he's all right. And that's where that confidence and that optimism started to come.
Yeah, so I recall in the clinic, actually, I think it was the first consultation, it may have been the second one, I can't remember for sure, but because we have the clinic set up with the two-way mirrors, and one of the reasons why I took you out of the room and I wanted you to see how he responded under our guidance, I wanted to create that sense of optimism. Look, he can actually cope. Yes, he makes those noises. That's because he's been rewarded for making those noises in the past. But look at his behavior, and I talked you through the behavior, say he's not actually that distressed. He's just doing this because he gets what he's got used to.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for showing that was, again, to create this sense of optimism. Oh, actually, he's not falling apart. And, there is a very careful professional judgment to be made there, because the last thing you want to do is push a dog too far and have a complete meltdown. But I like to think we know how to read dogs reasonably well where we and sort of saying, okay, we'd seen what he was like, etc., and thinking, no, he can cope far more than you realize. And by showing you that shows you, that gives you the optimism that actually the world is not going to fall apart if I make a mistake as well.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of, that was one of the things that was holding you back, was you were almost paralyzed by a fear of making a mistake and things getting worse.
No, it was and it was the second appointment because the first appointment was a therapy session for me. So the second appointment, I don't even think you'd planned to do that. It was you were sort of umming and ahhing about it, and it was right towards the end and say, right, let's try this. See what happens. And I was sort of like having a mini heart attack and in just shock of what you were actually doing. I'm like, no, he's not going to cope. We can't leave. He's never been here before. He's just going to have a complete meltdown, and you sort of metaphorically locked me in that room so I couldn't go out and rescue him. But it was absolutely fine. And I think even then, as much as like the shock and the disbelief, and I still didn't get the full optimism because we weren't in our home environment. Because all I was thinking, even though it was so positive and I was just amazed, I was the sort of pessimist in me was coming and saying, well, this is a new environment then. So actually it's different because it's our home. What's the trigger that it can't leave? So I was I could see the evidence, but there was something that was holding me back thinking, yeah, but I don't want to get too optimistic because I've been here before. But that was a game changer. But then actually seeing that in real life when I was doing the real life training sessions was, yeah, that for me was just...
You'd been through a lot as well, so you wouldn't expect somebody to sort of completely change. But as I say, it's about getting people onto the right road, I think, for it all.
Definitely. Yeah.
Another one of these domains that we think about, the theoretical domains, is about ensuring you have reinforcement for your own behavior to become better, and encouraging you to celebrate the successes. And I know Millie is brilliant at this because she gives us updates when she's doing the follow-up, etc. But that I think is a really important thing, that as far as helping you to develop the changes and improve the optimism is making sure you have. So, can you remember sort of some of the early successes that you had that you celebrated?
Oh, I think I must have celebrated every little thing with Millie. She was probably getting sick of my emails towards the end, but she always responded with just that celebration and that recognition for, even though it might seem small, actually it's a really big thing. But then we'd always set new objectives as well, so it wasn't doing the same thing all the time. It was sort of tweaking it slightly, so I didn't feel like I was stuck on a hamster wheel just going around and not getting anywhere. There was very small achievable changes. So yeah, I think we did a lot of celebrating, Millie, between us in the and I remember I could genuinely hear in your tone in your email how like really proud you were as well of Drax, but of me as well, and that really came through, like really genuine. So that like helped and kept me going.
And it is really important because not just does that feed into you, but it also bookmarks those successes that you have made progress. And it's important to realize that it may only be small steps initially, but that is progress, and because it is a long journey. And especially with these types of cases, it does take a long time. We know that he's not perfect now in certain aspects of his behavior. I'm sure he's the perfect companion. But that is part of the whole process. We've talked a lot about emotions as well. So that's another one of these domains, is making sure sort of the emotional side of things are set up well. But I think another one that was really important in your case, or a couple of others just before we sort of finish on the theoretical domains, was visualizing goals. Rather than just the end goal, having the goals on the way, but also making sure that your environment was set up to enable change. Now, you had one of these remote cameras, which I think was that they are incredibly useful in these sort of situations to be able to see and monitor if they're used appropriately. But to
flip that on its head, I think something we worked towards together towards the end was getting you to stop looking at that camera.
Yes. Yeah, it became a bit of an obsession.
Yeah. But I think, again, that's talking of visualizing goals, I can remember lots along the way of just little things like going out of the gate or going down, getting further away, and things that you didn't think you would achieve. And as we've been saying, kind of recognition that you've met that, now on to the next thing. They are very, very important things to acknowledge, because at one point you didn't believe they were possible.
No.
Even if, in the grand scheme of things, it seems small. And I relayed a bit of an email that I just checked earlier with looking back at things with Daniel, and said, thinking about real life situations you can go out and do during this time. Go to the pub.
That was a goal.
We goals.
We did. We went to the pub one day, and I think I was checking the camera quite a lot, but most of the time I just asked Millie to like look at the camera, please. Just so.
But I actually remember in one of the early sessions you actually saying that was a goal. Is sort of, we'd like to just be able to go to the pub.
We're not alcohol if you like
basis.
It was a luxury.
Yeah. But that was a measure, and that's it. Yeah, it is a really important thing to be able to feel that you can do it. And one thing to be able to go to a pub, another thing to go to the pub and be able to relax. That's a separate goal. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and we couldn't do that with Drax. He's not a pub dog. We quite quickly realised that didn't make a very stressful time at the pub. So then we just couldn't go at all. So yeah, to actually be able to go for an hour was just remarkable, really.
It's really strange though, because to see how far he's come as well. I don't know if Becky's mentioned, but he's always been crate trained. He'd sleep in his crate, but his crate was always in our bedroom, and he used to always sleep in the same room. And if we ended up going up to bed, he'd sit and he'd want to be taken up, and and wouldn't hear a peep out of him all night. And then obviously with all the training that we've been doing, he's now sleeping downstairs on his own.
On his own accord. One day he just refused to come upstairs. Just got in his bed.
That's because he feels secure in the home. Yeah. He doesn't have to be in sight of you. That's a really big landmark, and that's something you should celebrate later tonight. Well, actually he's doing that.
It's massive. Yeah, I mean, I struggled with he's not coming to bed.
So I can't hear him. He's not whining at the bottom of the stairs. But now I take him up for his last wee, and then he'll
that's his safe haven now. So
we don't worry. You got a little one. She'll be getting into bed with you.
Oh no, she's in bed anyway. I think that's probably why he stayed downstairs, because of my snoring, and she would just nightmares in her sleep. So
it's actually really quite. He saw that,
That's generally it.
I mean, that's massive success in itself. Yeah.
No. And these are important things. So, we've talked a lot about that laying the groundwork. The other thing next week, when we talk more about some of the specific interventions and what works and what doesn't work, that was really important was, we hinted at this in an earlier episode, was considerations of health. A lot of the cases we see do have health problems. And I know when we first saw Drax, we had this strange way of lying, and we talked about that in a previous episode, so people can listen to that. We did the medical work from a musculoskeletal point of view. He came through with a clean bill of health, but he did have this sort of sensitive tummy, and he's prone to these flare-ups. So IBD, if you like. And I think I just want to say at this point, it's really important that people are aware of this. And we see these sorts of grumbling, and particularly these sort of grumbling, very varied, sort of intermittently painful conditions, quite commonly associated with separation-related problems. It's something we're starting to pick up on, that actually, whilst, we've done a lot to try and promote awareness of pain and discomfort and problem behavior, we're starting now to get a sense that with some of the separation-related problems, the uncomfortable conditions are not those sort of consistent conditions like sore hips so much, but they're those things that are more intermittent. And we don't know exactly what's going on, but the way that I think about it is that because it's intermittent, that's perhaps when you've got a stressed dog, that's why they don't feel secure, because they can't predict when they're going to be uncomfortable. And they're often, some of them are musculoskeletal conditions, but they're musculoskeletal conditions that sort of are prone to more flare-ups, or, as I say, in Drax's case, that thing with his tummy. It's painful for him. And maybe that's what's feeding into some of the issues. So that's something that's going to be one of my future projects coming up, I think. But I just want to sort of emphasize that part of the preparation. There's the human preparation for behavior change and addressing some of those things and moving forward. But there's also making sure that your dog is physically and potentially mentally as healthy as it can be to make the progress. So in some cases, we may have to look at medication in order to stabilize that side of things. So in this episode, I hope what we've shown is that when it comes to managing problem behavior, we need to work with the client as much as with their pets. We hope we've given the listener insight into some of the ways that we help clients change their own behavior in line with what we need them to do to help their pet. We hope we've also convinced you that there is both science and skill behind both client and pet behavior change processes. It's a lot more than simply training the animal, and it doesn't necessarily have to be such a big burden. And if you get it right, there's no harm in setting up those things so that you can actually enjoy them. And in the next episode, we're going to shift to the focus back onto Drax and sort of what we did to Drax. And we've talked a lot about you and talk about what we did to help him and why. So please join us if you can. But before we close, I must finish by thanking once again Becky and Craig for being such wonderful and open guests about their experience. So thank you so much. And also Millie for co-hosting the series and being a large part of the inspiration behind it, and just for being Millie. And thank you also to you for listening. I hope you'll join us for the next episode when we'll explore Drax's side of the behavior modification process. Thank you and take care.
Thank you. Bye. We hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you want to make sure you don't miss out on the next episode, don't forget to follow us on whatever platform you use for your podcasts.
We'd also really appreciate you giving us a thumbs up rating and sharing details with others who you think might be interested.
If you are listening on YouTube, you can also leave comments, and we'd love to see your thoughts and suggestions on the episode. You can even go over to YouTube at www.youtube.com/@whatmakesyouklick2323/podcasts and leave a comment on the show, even if you have listened using a different platform. Alternatively, you can leave a message for us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/DSMpod.
And if you think it might be useful to others, don't forget to share the details with them.
Finally, if you have been affected by any of the issues raised in this episode, please remember you're not alone and professional help is available. In the UK, we recommend you consult with a certificated clinical animal behaviourist, and you can find a list of these at www.ccab.uk. You can also find further details of the Lincoln Animal Behaviour Clinic at www.animalbehaviourclinic.lincoln.ac.uk. That's Animal Behaviour Clinic, all one word, .lincoln.ac.uk. In the notes linked to the show, we provide further contact details, including to international groups.
This has been an independent Millie and Mills production, and so the views expressed by us are our own and not those of the University of Lincoln. Editing was done by Thomas Mills and original music provided by Henry Eady. Thank you for listening, and all the best till next time.